Chapter 24. When he woke, Eiji lay on his bed and feverishly updated his list. 87. Lord Felix didn't mind performing menial chores like cleaning or baking. 88. Lord Felix had parents and siblings, or did once. 89. Lord Felix had the nicest laugh in the world. 90. Lord Felix's hands were amazingly tender, despite being so big and calloused. 91. Lord Felix was an excellent kisser. Well, perhaps it was too soon to form an opinion on the gods kissing. Lord Felix had been disappointingly chaste in his affections. His hands had only strayed from Eji's waist to stroke his hair and cradle his face, and though Eiji had opened his lips in invitation, his master had not deepened their kisses. No one would have guessed that from the way the god had beamed when he bid Eiji good night at the curtain of his room. He'd seemed more glowing and replete than Lord Antony had ever been after making love with Lord Marcus, and all from a few chaste kisses. What a strange god Eiji served. He wasn't sure why the thought made his lips curve irrepressibly upwards, but it did. When Eiji pushed through his curtain, he was a little disappointed to find that Lord Felix had already left for his day's labors in the elder rooms, though of course he'd known that would be the case. More unexpected was the note on the little table, tucked under the carefully wrapped remnants of the loaf they'd made last night. As Eiji reached for it, he remembered the eager way his master had watched as he took the first warm bite of their bread. He'd seemed to revel in the sight of Eji's pleasure, even cheering softly when Eiji pronounced it good. Eiji smiled at the memory as he unfolded the note and began reading the tiny, careful script. Dear Eiji, thank you again for a wonderful time last night. Perhaps we could do it again sometime soon? Next time, though, I'll leave the business of shaping the loaf to your superior expertise. Is it strange to thank you for kissing me? Probably, but I feel so grateful I have to say it anyway. Thank you for standing so close to me. Thank you for pressing your beautiful soft lips to mine. Thank you for letting your breath warm my face. It was a moment I'll treasure forever. Thank you for sharing it with me. I can't imagine the courage it must have taken for you to make that request. But I shouldn't have been surprised. Your bravery astonishes me and humbles me all the time. It's terrifying to give something new your all. Myself, I'm always tempted to give a half-hearted effort because I'm afraid to learn that my best isn't good enough. But you do it every day, and then you come back to the rooms you share with a stranger and you still have the courage to talk with me. It makes me weak in the knees just to think about how brave you are. I hope these sort of sentiments might be easier for you to handle in a letter than with me right there, making you feel like you have to respond. You don't have to respond, just for the record. I only want you to know how wonderful I think you are, and how lucky I am to have you in my life. I hope you have a good day. I know that I will, because I can look forward to seeing you this evening. Yours, Felix. Eiji stared down at the little scrap of paper for an embarrassingly long time. He was liable to make himself late, but he couldn't stop rereading the words. His vision blurred, and he realized he was in danger of crying. A hasty step back ensured that none of his tears would damage the paper. He refolded the note carefully and suppressed a ridiculous urge to clutch it to his chest. That would crumple the paper, and he had no intention of letting even the slightest hint of a tear or wrinkle damage it. As such, Eiji disregarded his next impulse, which was to tuck the note into the pocket of his robe and carry it with him all day. No, he needed to preserve this fragile little thing so that he could keep it forever. He took it back to his room, undid the straps on the bookshelf, and tucked the note between the pages of a chunky volume of poetry. Only once it was secured did he set off for the kitchen. He was hardly aware of where his feet were taking him. His head was too full of words to make any note of his surroundings. The bit that stayed stuck in his head most powerfully was a line about how Eiji made his master weak in the knees. Every time he ran over the words, he felt the response echoed in his own knees. He caused a reaction in the god. He caused Lord Felix to have feelings, and strong ones. It was unthinkable, but that didn't erase the full-body thrills of pleasure that chased one another through him as he thought about it. Before he knew it, Eiji was opening the door to the kitchens. He tried to tame his expression into something neutral, but as soon as he walked through the door, everyone was looking at him. "Eiji!" Norio nearly bowled him over in his rush to reach Eji's side. "How did it go?" Eiji was too startled to reply, but he felt traitorous heat creeping over his face at the memory. Cold, soft lips, unfathomably powerful hands gentle in his hair, his name whispered like a prayer between kisses. Norio hooted loudly, and Eiji fought down an impulse to turn and run from the kitchens. That would hardly be an indicator of the courage his master had lauded in his note. "Lay off, Norio," Zenji scolded. Eiji hadn't noticed the older man coming to join them, but his hand clamped down on Eji's shoulder in a gesture that reassured him more than he would have guessed possible from a simple touch. He straightened under it and tried to will the flush from his cheeks. All right, sorry." Norio hardly looked chastened, scooting even closer to Eiji. "But what happened?" Yudai shook his head reprovingly, but he moved closer as well. "He doesn't have to tell you, Norio." Other men were also drifting in their direction, eager for the gossip. Eiji cast his eyes around until he saw Rokuro, working at his station and not even glancing in his direction. He was well within earshot and had to know what was going on, but he pretended that it was of no interest whatsoever. The gentleness of the gesture made Eiji smile as he lifted his head to look at Norio. "If my lord wishes to discuss this with you, I'm sure he'll find a chance to do so," he told his nosy cadre mate. "It isn't my place until he does." Norio groaned as if he were being killed, but Zenji patted Eji's shoulder approvingly. "You heard the man," he said to the gathered workers. "Now go on. I know you all have better things to do than stand around drooling for gossip." Eiji headed gratefully for Rokuro's station, where the baker finally looked up from his work and smiled. "Your food is over there," he said, gesturing with a jerk of his head. Eiji scooped up the plate and settled on a barrel to eat. Norio, who had followed him back to Rokuro's station, lost no time in resuming his wheedling. "Come on," he pleaded. "At least tell me if you're together now. You are, right? You're a couple?" A couple? That was absurd. The word implied any number of things that would never be true of his relationship with Lord Felix. Still, something had definitely shifted. The kisses, the note, the talk of flirting. There was something new and breathless in their relationship, and Eiji was astonished to discover that despite his usual dislike of change, he was thrilled to find out what would come next. Yes, things were not what they had been yesterday afternoon. "Norio?" Rokuro's voice, as close to stern as Eiji had ever heard it, sliced into his dizzy whirl of thoughts. "Eiji already told you he doesn't want to talk about this. If you can't leave him alone, I'll have to banish you from my space until lunchtime, and you know I really don't want to do that." Norio pouted theatrically, but Eiji thought he saw a little genuine hurt on the smaller man's face. "Fine, sorry. I was just curious." "There's plenty of other gossip anyway," Rokuro said firmly. "Eiji, you'll never guess what you missed this morning." The prompt was all it took for Norio to brighten and resume his chatter. Eiji only realized how tense he'd gotten when he relaxed. He would have hated to be the cause of a fight between Rokuro and Norio, especially now that Lord Felix had him wondering whether the two of them might become lovers. "Lord Antony himself!" Norio said breathlessly, and Eiji nearly choked on his bite of fish. His new offering hadn't answered the door when Naoki brought the tray, and the silly thing didn't even leave it outside the door. Zenji told him off for that, you better believe me. But he only found out because Lord Antony brought his offering down here to ask for some food a little later. That didn't make any sense. Why would Lord Antony take so much trouble for an attendant who was already boring him? Then again, the god had always been insistent that Eiji eat and rest well to ensure that he was ready to be fed from whenever Lord Antony required. I took up the food myself, Noria went on. I mentioned that it was all a little unusual, but the offering said Lord Antony wasn't using him or anything. Rokuro chuckled, not seeming to notice Eiji's continued silence. That's hardly surprising. He's terribly loud and clumsy, just from what little I saw. Aw, he seems like a sweet kid, Norio said defensively. I thought he might cry or hug me. He was so happy to see the eggs. All right, but that kind of stance from the temple's choice? The baker's voice was incredulous as he added flour to his trench. Oh, haven't you heard? Norio grinned with the pleasure of relaying new gossip. He wasn't the temple's choice. In fact, from what I hear, he was in the back row. Eiji resumed eating mechanically, though he couldn't taste his food. It did make sense that the young man he'd met wasn't the temple's choice. As Rokuro had observed, he was a little clumsier and much more talkative than the priest would have condoned. What on earth had motivated Lord Antony to choose him? More than that, why had the god taken the trouble to escort this subpar offering to the kitchens himself? It was so strange to think of Lord Antony in the kitchens. The idea made Eiji's skin prickle uncomfortably. He felt claustrophobic and exposed all at once at the idea of this cozy sanctuary being viewed by the unimpressed silver eyes of his master. His former master, he reminded himself. He belonged to Lord Felix now. He'd been chosen and found worthy. It felt like a lie. He wished he'd brought the note after all, something real and tangible that he could grab to assure himself that he was wanted. Still, even without the talisman, there was the oven in which they'd baked their penis loaf last night. There was the trench where their hands had moved and kneaded together. And that spot, that exact bit of the counter that Noria was sitting on, that was where Eiji had leaned as they... We kissed, he blurted, and flushed when the other two turned to gawk at him. He was being ridiculous, he knew, but if he told Rokuro and Norio, that would make it all more real. It would give his memories enough weight and heft that he'd be able to cling to them instead of falling into useless speculation about gods who no longer concerned him. I don't know if we're together or anything, he faltered after the silence dragged too long. But we kissed. It was only kissing. Of course I offered. Not that my lord needs my permission, but... Of course he's taking it slow, Rokuro cut in, grinning enormously. Lord Felix isn't some pushy brute. Oh, Eiji, did he make it nice for you? I'm sure he did. Gah! I'm so happy for you. The baker threw his arms around Eiji, doughy hands making a mess of his robes, and Norio quietly chanted, I knew it! I knew it! I knew it! And this time, Eiji's blush came with a shaky grin.